So, wasn't planning to cover this one this week, but word on the street is that an HD remake is in the works, and this is one of the few remaining Apogee titles I've never played, so what the heck. Today's Ancient DOS game is Crystal Caves, and I gotta say, this game gave me some seriously mixed feelings, though at the same time, playing through this for the first time ever, it's given me an interesting glimpse into Apogee's history, and it actually explains a lot, as this seems to be the linchpin game, the one that set the standard for every Apogee platformer following, as every good aspect of Apogee's platformers, and every bad one, can trace themselves back to this trilogy. To that end, given that the HD remake is just around the corner, my goal with this video is mostly to point out some of the design decisions which I think should be updated along with the HD remake to result in a better game overall that won't be needlessly frustrating in certain moments, or to just improve the flow of gameplay in general. Again, this game's pretty fun for the most part, but there was definitely room for improvement, so if you're gonna HDify it, you might as well make a few minor adjustments too, right? As already stated, Crystal Caves was developed and released by Apogee in 1991 as a one-player platformer. It only supports EGA 320x200 16-color graphics and PC speaker sound, and as for its current release state, it's still shareware but rarely available as a digital download from many places online, being $6 at GOG and $5 from both Steam and straight from the 3D Realms website. My copy, however, happens to be a physical copy, and from what I could tell, trying to find info on physical copies, this is pretty hard to get hold of. I found only a single copy of the full version of Crystal Caves for sale while searching, and it was priced fairly reasonably at $20 given its rarity. But at the same time, I found a number of other copies for sale, some ludicrously priced, all of which were only shareware copies of the game, meaning they'd only have the first episode of the game, not all 3 episodes. And this isn't too unexpected, as shareware vendors selling their own discs like this was an extremely common thing back then, but yeah, definitely complicates trying to find a physical copy, so be careful if that's what you're going for. I think we can safely skip having a full story segment for this one, but to summarize, you play the role of Milo Steamwitz, who's abandoned the notion of taking over the family farm, instead searching the galaxy for ways to get rich quick. Though for each scheme he hatches, he needs the capital to get it going, and figures the best way to get that cash is by raiding the monster-infested mines of Planet Altair to get lots and lots of crystals, which he can then trade in for the things he needs to get his money-making plans rolling. The first episode has Milo wanting to get into the Twibble breeding business. The next episode, he's trying to get into the medical slug business. And by the third episode, he's given up on organic things entirely and decides to instead get into real estate. One thing I want to quickly point out in relation to the story though, which is kind of neat, is that because his spaceship's controls are so temperamental and a particular planet keeps getting in his way, at the start of the third episode he decides to just blow a hole clean through the said planet so he doesn't have to worry about it anymore. And when the game begins proper and you see the planets orbiting in the sky, that chunk is still missing from it. But yeah, the gameplay is pretty much exactly what you would expect from a modern Apogee platformer, though definitely simpler. You only have 4 controls: move left, move right, jump, and fire, with your fire button also acting as an action button when you're near switches or levers. Now each episode has its own main hub area with 16 different levels to explore. And while you can theoretically explore these levels in any order you want, some of them are placed in the path of others, and thus have to be completed before you can move past them, since you automatically enter them just by touching the doors. The goal of each level is to collect every crystal, and then make your way to the exit. Anything less than 100% collection of the crystals is not good enough, though there's also other treasures strewn around to help add to your final score if that's what you want to go for, but only the crystals ultimately matter. And interestingly enough, the crystals have a different design to them in each of the 3 episodes, and while they come in a variety of colors, the colors are ultimately just for show. Unlike a typical platformer though, you have infinite lives, technically. And see that health bar at the bottom? That's actually referred to by the documentation as your lives, and you lose one and become invulnerable for a moment anytime you take a hit. So even though they're called lives, it's more aptly a health bar. Now, most things in the game which can hurt you only do a single point of damage, but there are some notable exceptions. Green mushrooms will instantly kill you on contact if you're not presently immune to damage, and then there's the air pumps, one in each level, where if you accidentally shoot the pump, all the air will escape and you'll explode from the sudden vacuum. Every level is exactly 2 screens wide and 2 screens tall, so these aren't big levels by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, this small size to the levels is a good thing, because many of the level designs can be pretty frustrating. It's definitely more of a thing in the second and third episodes where the difficulty shoots up immediately, but the first episode, it's much more manageable. In fact, this leads into one of the first improvements I hope we see in the HD version, as quite a number of the levels require you to do certain things in a certain order to succeed, and if you screw up that order, you're going to end up unable to win and I'll have to restart the level. Now obviously dying is the fastest way to restart, but if you don't have an easy way to die, there's no restart option. In order to restart a level without dying, you have to open up the menu, select quit, select to go back to the main level, wait for that to load, walk back into the level you were playing, and there you go. Having an option to just restart a level on command would be extremely handy. This even leads into another improvement I feel would be extremely interesting without being even remotely difficult to implement. Now, some of the levels revolve around collecting specific power-ups and using their ability to complete a task within a time limit. Now, you can get a boost to your gun so that you can kill just about all enemies in a single shot, even the ones you normally can't kill. You can flip gravity. You can stop time, which also allows you to safely walk past all enemies, or you can become super strong, able to just walk through everything, taking no damage or possibly even destroying some enemies in the process. All of these abilities, though, have a time limit, and once that time limit expires, the power-up doesn't come back. And it might seem like making the power-up come back might make it too easy to win, but since the idea is to use these power-ups to clear certain obstacles or complete certain tasks, they often don't make things easier, they just make things possible at all. So to help mitigate making the power-ups come back once they expire, you just make the time limits tighter. More often than not, the power-ups last about twice as long as they really need to, so if you tighten those time limits and make it possible for each individual power-up in every level to have its own custom time limit, well, suddenly allowing them to respawn when they expire doesn't affect the difficulty at all, and instead merely prevents soft-locking yourself and having to restart a level from scratch. Now, just to give an example, in this level here, you have to flip gravity to get into the eastern side of it, but you can go back without the gravity flipped. If you get to the end and you realize that you missed a crystal, you can go back and get them, but with the gravity power-up already consumed, you have no way to return, and thus you're stuck. Now, normally this kind of poor planning in the level design would be needlessly frustrating, but again, these are short levels, so having to redo them from simple mistakes like that is still annoying for sure, but you don't feel nearly as set back when it happens, and not having to deal with that frustration at all would be nothing but a good thing. Well, speaking of the crystals, it's another thing I noticed while playing through this. Whenever you get the last crystal in a level after having just boot the game up, you get a message saying that you collected the last crystal. Normally instead, you just hear a different sound effect compared to the usual crystal collecting sound effect. But that sound effect is often out-prioritized by jumping sounds, shooting sounds, or pretty much any other sounds, so it's easy to miss when you've got the last crystal. Now obviously in an HD remake, the sound effects aren't going to interrupt each other as you're going to have more than just one sound channel, but a good addition would be a visual cue, such as words flying up saying go to exit or all crystals collected, so that you're not relying on audio alone to know that you're good to leave the level. Another definite improvement needed though is with head bonking. Now, for the most part, the jumping mechanics actually work extremely well. I mean, some of the jumps are nearly pixel perfect, which doesn't help and can make it difficult to know if you're going the right way or not. But just as an example of some forward thinking here, if you hold the jump key while in a one tile tall space and exit it, you immediately jump up, even if there's no floor underneath, making it surprisingly easy to jump out of small holes like that. But, that said, there are 3 very, very specific kinds of jumps the game often requires you to make, and all of them are terrible for the same reason. Well, this first one, jumping into a one-tile gap with a ceiling extending beyond the gap, fails quite frequently, since if you hit your head on a ceiling, you lose your horizontal momentum and immediately start falling. Meaning, if you haven't positioned yourself perfectly, you're not getting in there. This next one is when you're trying to jump out of a 2-tile tall gap. With a 1-tile gap, you just hold jump and you'll jump precisely every time. With a 2-tile gap, you'll often hit your head trying to clear the ceiling and just end up falling. And then sometimes there's sections like these, which are 3 tiles tall, and you need to jump over something deadly that's on the floor, but your jump height is actually 2.5 tiles, meaning you hit your head on the ceiling, lose your horizontal momentum, and end up just barely able to clear these things. Jump too late, you hit it on the way up. Jump too early, you hit it on the way down. So the improvement needed here to jumping is to simply not make hitting the ceiling do anything to the jump arc. No head bonking, your vertical movement just ends up blocked by the ceiling. Making that tiny little change would eliminate every single one of those temperamental jumping situations I just mentioned, and would allow the gameplay to flow much more cleanly. However, there is one improvement which absolutely has to be made in the HD remake no matter what, as it's presently just a really cruel joke. There's a way in episode 3 to softlock your current game. Not just the level, but the game itself, since this happens in the main hub level, forcing most people to reload from a much earlier save or start over. And it all comes down to this section right here. On the surface, it looks as though the only way out of this section is right up here, but it's too high to reach from the ground, and because of the head bonking mechanics I just mentioned, you can't make the jump from the platform to the side either. If you go into this section without clearing all of the other levels first, you effectively cannot beat the game, as there's no way back out, even if you save and restore, as the game remembers your coordinates on the map. That said, there's a couple ways out of this predicament, but neither involve legitimate gameplay. The first is to just use the cheat codes, as there's a code you can put in which enables God mode, and in this process allows flipping gravity at the press of a button, so you can just do that. However, if you want to avoid entering a cheat code, there is another way, and it comes right back around to what I just said about how the game saves your current coordinates. If you jump, and then save while in the air before you reach the height of the gap, then reload and hold the jump button down while the game is reloading, the game will process your jump before it figures out that you're not standing on the ground, allowing you to do a mid-air jump, and this is the only way to get out of this poorly designed section without cheating. Probably a good thing saving is disabled in the actual levels given an exploit like that one. Overall, I mostly enjoyed playing Crystal Caves, but it's rather rough around the edges, resulting in lots of completely needless frustration, so I'm really hoping that roughness is smoothed out for the HD remake. Now just to give a quick recap, the changes I'm hoping to see are 1. Add a restart level button or menu option. 2. Make time-limited power-ups respawn when they expire, while at the same time tightening their time limits on a per-level basis to justify this. 3. Add a visual cue to go along with the audio cue when you collect the final crystal in a level. 4. Get rid of head bonking. Allow the player to just slide across the ceiling as their jump continues to attempt to raise them up. And 5. Make it possible to get out of the upper left section of the episode 3 main level without having to use cheats or exploits. If the HD remake hits all of those points, then I have no doubt that it'll be an awesome game. Yep, super simple to set this one up in DOSBox. Just leave cycle set to auto and you're good to go. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. We're going to go straight into another review next month for episode 276, debuting on Saturday, October 3rd, where we'll be taking a look at yet another game to tackle the formula of piloting both a helicopter and a tank. Yeah, Seek and Destroy was far from the only game to give you such a duo, but this particular one is one of the few to do it in 3D, so be sure to stay tuned to see this game in action. Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to those of you supporting me on Patreon. Here's just a small random selection of you all.